outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan, the podcast. I'm Alan Crone, the CEO of the Crone Law Firm, and I'm here with Jackson McNeil, who is the president of Commute Options, which is it part of Innovate Memphis? How is your group related to Innovate Memphis?
That's right. Yeah, we're in an initiative of Innovate Memphis. So our Commute Options program lives within Innovate. And so within Innovate, we have a number of kind of transportation and mobility initiatives, and Commute Options is one of those.
Well, I've got to tell you that this subject is very near and dear to my heart. I believe that mobility may be the most important issue in Memphis, that if we could solve the mobility issue, I think we'd solve a lot of other problems.
You know, I agree. And I think that transportation and mobility is an issue that is important to many people's lives, but it isn't always the first priority issue for many folks. And so I feel privileged to have the opportunity to think about these things every day and try to improve transportation and mobility for the lives of Memphians.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about the practical hurdles
Sure.
that many of our fellow citizens here in Memphis face when it comes to mobility.
Yeah, so Memphis is a bit of a unique context, partly because we are such a large, sprawling city of about 300 square miles. To put that in perspective, that's just about the same as New York City, and we have less than a tenth of the population. And so if you think about the kind of jobs that are spread out that 300 miles, and also the kind of city dollars that we have to service those 300 miles, whether that's through solid waste, whether that's through transportation infrastructure, that makes things a lot more challenging for our city to service that infrastructure, to provide that infrastructure, and also creates situations where essentially people are car dependent. We know that a majority of our kind of low and middle income jobs are logistics and warehouse based. Just by nature of those jobs, those are on the outskirts of towns. They take up huge plots of land, which makes it even harder to service a lot of those areas through public transit, through things like biking and walking. And so we've created a situation where folks really have to take on oftentimes a $10,000, $12,000 a year liability in owning, maintaining, servicing a car, just to be able to experience the freedom to get to work, see family, see friends. And we really see the future of Memphis as a place where people have multiple options to get wherever they want to go in the city of Memphis.
And it's not just work, right? I mean, if you're a young person without access to a car and you want to get training or education, that's also very difficult.
That's right. I think that we oftentimes forget that there is there are tens of thousands of households in Memphis that do not own a car. There are people who choose not to own a car. There are people who can't drive because of a disability, because of age. So it's really a huge swath of our population. I think any parents out there listening know that having a child that can't drive takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to coordinate their transportation. If you care for a parent who's aging and you're taking them to doctor's appointments all the time, it really becomes a huge burden, particularly for folks who who don't have a lot of margin in their lives to do those kinds of things, that their 2 hours a day they spend commuting would be much better served spent with family, working in educational settings. The list goes on and on.
Right. And the time you mentioned, commute time,
Yep.
the time that it takes, if you don't have a car and you're relying on public transportation, the time that it takes to get from point A to point B can be debilitating.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there are, I think we've all heard the countless stories of folks who have to take 2-hour commutes to and from work on the bus. And I really believe that we can do much better as a city to adequately fund public transit to provide that service to folks who need it across our city.
Well, we've identified the problem. What do you think what are the solutions that your group is working on?
Yeah, sure. So through our Commute Options program, we work primarily with employers and K through 12 schools to really encourage and provide education on transportation options. So what would it look like for you to take your kid to school and use a carpool? Or if you live close enough, what would it look like to use a safe walking or bike route to get there? If you are an employer, what kind of incentives can you use to encourage your employees to not all drive their own single occupancy vehicles to work? I think in a lot of cases, parking is a huge expense for employers, especially large employers. And so the less parking you have to provide, the less kind of liability you have to take on there from a cost perspective. And so really our goal for Commute Options is to provide those options for people to get to and from work, to and from school. And then also working closely with our partners like MATA, the city of Memphis, who are responsible for that transportation infrastructure, and helping them help advocate for them. We know that there are many priority issues in Memphis. Like I said, transportation isn't always at the top. But we know that transportation is such an integral part of the other key issues that people think about, whether that's poverty, whether that's crime, the freedom to get anywhere people need to be in Memphis is all kind of tied into transportation. Another thing that Innovate has worked on in the past is transit vision. So this is essentially the transit plan that was created as part of Memphis 3.0 that our transit agency adopted and is currently being updated based on kind of current conditions. But we're still advocating for increased funding for transit. We know we have a long way to go to even be on par with our peer cities. And so, we work closely with MATA and some other local groups that really do see the importance and care about transit to try to push that forward.
Right. And what do you think I've always said that buses running fixed routes is kind of the Ralph Cramden model. What's the George Jetson model for public transportation? Where should we be headed?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people in Memphis travel to other cities and they see effective, heavy infrastructure, heavy rail infrastructure, subways, light rail, all this stuff. All those things are great. They cost a whole lot of money. And they also require a certain amount of density to really make those things pencil out. And so I think as the city tries to create more density kind of in the core of the city, those things will become more and more viable. And in the meantime, I think Matt is pursuing a really great kind of in-between option, which is called bus rapid transit, which essentially acts like light rail at a fraction of the cost. And so you do have more frequency. I think one of the problems with many public transportation agencies across the country is unless it's running frequently enough, you have to be studying the schedule. You have to know exactly when to leave your house. But if you have the ability to really leave whenever and know that a bus is coming in the next 10, 15 minutes, that really kind of changes the way that you use and interact with public transit. And so Matt has plans for a bus rapid transit route that will go from downtown to the University of Memphis. And so I think that's a great innovative way to show people kind of the potentials of public transit beyond kind of the core of just the fixed route system that we know of in Memphis.
Right. And I couldn't agree with you more on the light rail. I've been doing some speaking on density, and that always comes up. Well, you know, wouldn't it be great to have light rail going down Poplar Avenue? And it absolutely would be wonderful. But we're about 10,000 people per square mile shy of having the density to do that. And so we need to, as a community, we need to start looking at some other options, but because it's so important.
Right. Yeah, I think it's the same kind of conversation that we were having 5 to 10 years ago about a grocery store downtown, right? As the downtown area has grown, that's become a more viable option. And we now have some great kind of local small scale grocery stores. But at the time, there just wasn't the population density to justify that kind of with the market conditions.
Well, it's a tough thing, right? I mean, density on paper is great. You know, you can see these mixed use developments going up where there's, you know, within a mile, you've got a lot of retail, a lot of maybe some office and residential, but everyone wants that to go in another part of town. No one wants it. Nobody wants it down the street from them. And I think we need to readjust our perspective on good versus bad density?
You know, I think that, yeah, a lot, like you said, a lot of people want the things that come with density, but increasing density, I think slowly and kind of gradually is important for folks to kind of see it become real, whether that's in their neighborhood, close to their neighborhood. And another thing that I think is really important and oftentimes is one of the big barriers to increasing density is people think about, well, if I live downtown and I always have access to free on-street parking and an apartment building is going to be built right next to me, well, then what happens to my parking? Or I park on the street in my neighborhood. And so I think transportation is tied very closely into this conversation, because as we seek to grow as a city, not in terms of land, but in terms of population, and attract more folks from outside of Memphis and keep our talent within Memphis, it's going to be really important that we have a transportation system and the infrastructure to support that density, where people are able to live in places that don't require a car. There's some great kind of potential options like car share. Memphis used to have a downtown car share system. So when I lived downtown and didn't have a car, I could use Zipcar and use a car to get to the grocery store, but I didn't have to have one for every trip, and didn't have to be so dependent on, you know, the on-street parking right outside of my apartment. So, you know, I think as we seek to move in that direction, we have to integrate our conversations of transportation and kind of transforming the way we think about that.
Yeah, I think we've it really goes down to block by block, lot by lot. How are we developing our real estate, and are we developing our real estate that in such a way that minimizes the importance of private vehicles? Right,
and there will always be a place for cars, and obviously cars are never going away, and that's not what we're advocating for. You know, we really want there to be true options for folks, and we know that in Memphis that's not necessarily the case. So if you do want to live in a neighborhood and not have to own a car, we want that to be accessible, affordable for anyone who desires kind of that kind of lifestyle.
So now, are you from Memphis?
I'm actually originally from Arkansas, just across the river.
Oh,
So
whereabouts?
I'm in Jonesboro.
Very nice. I grew up in West Memphis.
Okay, yeah, actually just across the river.
Yeah, my wife grew up in Hughes, Arkansas, so
Okay.
I'm very familiar with Eastern Arkansas. So how'd you get across the river? I have discovered, I think particularly on this side of the river,
Uh-huh.
that river's a bigger barrier than psychological barrier than maybe an actual one.
I think that's right. Yeah, I moved here in 2012 to attend Rhodes College. And so yeah, I mean, I grew up coming to Memphis. I was familiar with Memphis. My parents went to college here, so it was always, somewhere that felt familiar. And I knew of a lot of great things happening in Memphis and really wanted to be a part of that. So yeah, I moved here 2012, spent a few years away after grad school, and I just couldn't shake Memphis. I had to come back.
Once that barbecue sauce and blues get in your blood, it's hard to go through withdrawal. You got to come back.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I always say this. I think that Memphis is truly a place where you can make a difference in any field you're in. Right. I was in New York for a few years and got to be a part of some really great work happening, but coming back to Memphis has really helped me to see and understand that there are so many opportunities and potentials to do something meaningful here, as an individual, as a group of people. And so that's, really encouraging for me and my family, and really one of the reasons that we were excited to come back.
Well, I think there's a song that says, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And I think that was written about Memphis.
Yeah.
How'd you get into this public space?
Yeah. I was kind of exposed to this work through the urban studies program at Rhodes College. And I think they do a very good job of helping students become engaged in the community through nonprofit work, volunteering, internships. I think that is one of the best things about being in school here, is that there are just so many opportunities to plug in and get involved in different initiatives. And so I was able to do that in college and found out about this field called urban planning. And University of Memphis just happened to have a grad school program for it. So that's where I landed. Yeah. So realized while I was there that transportation was something that I really cared about. Selfishly, I'm someone who loves to ride my bike and get around the city without a car. And so I'm kind of marrying kind of my personal passions, my kind of intellectual passions with, a field that allows me to engage in those things. And so that's why, I say I feel really grateful and privileged to be able to do this work, because it is a bit niche and unique, particularly here in Memphis.
All right, well, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, do it.
How do you get to work in the morning?
Yeah, I rode my bike into work this morning. So my wife and I share a car. We call ourselves a car light family. We have either shared a car or not owned a car the whole time that we've been married. And, it does take some extra planning. Sometimes it takes some willingness to get on the bike or get, tie your shoes on and walk a little bit further than you might otherwise. But, one thing that I really try to encourage people with is that getting outside of your car and getting on a bus, carpooling, walking, biking, it really helps you see your community in a whole new way. You notice things that you wouldn't otherwise. You run into neighbors, you interact with people kind of on a human scale. I think we've all had that kind of feeling. I know I have of being in a car and you may be, 2 feet away from the person that's at a red light, but you feel kind of worlds away from that person. When I pull up on my bike next to someone at an intersection, we're human to human right there. When I pass someone walking on the street, when I'm on the bus with someone, I think that's just such a kind of different and unique experience that we've lost as a society and as a culture that spends a lot of our time moving throughout the city in kind of a 2-ton piece of metal that's very kind of protective and insular from the outside world.
Sure, sure. What advice would you give or instruction would you give to someone who's watching this who says, I'd like to look at some alternative ways of commuting?
Yeah, I mean,
what would you say to that person?
That's right. Yeah, I would say, first of all, we're always a resource here at Commute Options, commuteoptionsmemphis.com. You can reach me. And then I would say, find other folks who are interested in the same thing. With anything that you do that's new, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to not always be the easiest thing. And doing that with someone else, I think, makes it a whole lot easier. You have someone to bounce some ideas off of. You have someone to kind of experience a new thing with. So I always encourage people to, find someone else that wants to try. And even if they don't want to try, convince them to try it, whether that's a friend, a spouse, a child, family member, experience that new thing together, right? Like I said, it may not always be super comfortable, but we know that there are so many benefits to leaving your car at home, even if it's for just that one short trip. It's going to save you money. It's going to be better for our environment. Like I said, you are going to probably meet some neighbors along the way. You're going to feel healthier. It's going to clear your mind. I mean, there's nothing that feels better than getting to work in the morning and knowing I've already kind of knocked out my workout for the day, my exercise for the day, and just get to work much more kind of refreshed and ready to take on the day after that.
Well, a friend of mine and probably a friend of yours, Doug McGowan, he has famously said, "I don't want Memphis to be the last city to build an unnecessary parking garage." And what he means by that is, driverless vehicles, all kinds of other alternative, methods of transportation, that last mile. What do you think that are we looking at a situation in 4 or 5 years where we might be taking driverless vehicles and not needing to park?
I would probably say I'm more on the cynical side when it comes to that. I think that there are a lot of issues to work through. I think we've been promised autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles. It's like every year, it's like, oh, it'll be in the next 2 years. So I think that there is a lot of room for that work, particularly as it relates to pedestrian safety. That's an issue that we care about very deeply at Innovate and Commute Options. We know that folks are not going to walk places if they don't feel safe. And a lot of that has to do with the infrastructure that we've built, but a lot of it also has to do with just driver behavior. And so I think there's some potential to mitigate some of that. But back to the parking garage point, I think if we really take a hard look at kind of what is the best use of space that we have, there are always going to be a need for places to park cars. But for example, I used to live at the Chiska on South Main. And I looked out over kind of towards the east, and unless there was a Grizzlies game going on, I saw a sea of empty parking lots. And I know that space could be used a lot more efficiently. And so, to Doug's point, I think we have to be very thoughtful and strategic about how we're using our space, because there may not always be a world where we need that many parking spots, whether that's because of improved public transit, whether that's because of kind of leaps and bounds in autonomous vehicle technology. But we have to build the city for the future that we want, and not always for what exists today.
I mean, it's amazing how much the automobile has affected not just roads and that sort of thing, the proliferation, but architecture.
Yep.
And as you say, the way we use our space is, pardon the pun, is driven by the car.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can see it in residential architecture, right? From, homes that are built before kind of the popularity of the automobile to homes that are built with, a garage kind of as the most featured part of the home, and sometimes are as big as the actual living space of the home. Anything from that to, commercial space that requires a certain minimum of parking spaces. And so that makes developing commercial space, multifamily space a lot more expensive when you have to factor in the cost of providing parking for your building. So you're right. It's so much more kind of prevalent than just what we think of as transportation infrastructure, the roads and streets and traffic lights and all that stuff. It really kind of impacts many more aspects of our life and of our city.
You talk about pedestrian safety. I mean, you go to modern buildings and the parking lots are hostile to pedestrians.
That's
I mean,
right.
There's just no place to walk without walking in the roadway.
Yeah.
And we wonder, why we have to drive everywhere.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we have to do a much better job at providing safe places for pedestrians to walk. I mean, at the end of the day, I've done it too. Where you park at one end of the parking lot at a shopping center and you want to go to the other end, but it doesn't feel safe to walk over there. So you drive to the other end of the parking lot. Right.
Right.
So that's kind of an extreme example, but everything from sidewalk condition to the width of our streets and the amount of space that pedestrians have to be exposed to traffic. All of these things have a role to play in how safe we are or how safe we feel while using kind of our civic infrastructure.
Sure. Well, what do you think is the future, the immediate future for commuting in Memphis? Have any new initiatives?
Yeah, I hope that we can continue to build support for public transit. I'm really excited for Memphis to see the possibilities of things like bus rapid transit, and for kind of the broader Memphis community to understand the economic benefits of that, the social equity benefits of that kind of investment. I think that it's going to take a culture shift. Frankly, it's not just about building the right things, but it's also about kind of a mindset. And so, I hope that more and more people start to realize the importance of this and are able to find spaces to be engaged in these conversations, to advocate for the right things. I'll say kind of on our immediate horizon with commute options, we're going to be working with K through 12 schools kind of in a more focused and strategic way to work with parents, with teachers, with students, parent-teacher organizations, all these things to really help them see that there are potential options for getting their kids to school. We know it can impact the kind of truancy and chronic absenteeism issues that a lot of our schools face. Can provide public health benefits. And so we're really excited to kind of dive deeper into that work with our local schools here.
I mean, it's a tough time to be dealing with this because, I know that we're whether we know it or not, we're in the middle of an election year for city government.
Yep.
And crime obviously is a huge issue. I'm in education. But I would just encourage people, and I know you would, to try to bring up mobility as an issue in this campaign.
Yeah.
And get your candidates for mayor and city council on the record about it, because for the long haul, if we have a mobile city, if we have a city where people can get around easily,
Yep.
We're going to have a safer city and a more prosperous city.
That's exactly right. I'm excited or interested to see what all of our mayoral candidates have to say about mobility, and I hope that it is an issue that kind of rises, maybe not to the top, but as an important issue for folks, beyond just filling potholes and kind of the basic maintenance. But how are we reimagining our city for the future that we want?
Well, and public transportation, I think in Memphis has a lot of baggage.
That's
I
right.
think there's a racial element,
Yeah.
going back to Rosa Parks, and then I think there's also a class element, right? I mean, right now we've got a culture that public transportation is for poor folks.
Yep.
And I think the cities that have a vibrant public transport have a egalitarian, if you will,
Sure.
public transportation where all classes and income levels, colors will ride
Yep.
with each other. And any thoughts on how we inculcate that kind of culture? Because that's not something you can snap your fingers and change.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that transit has to be useful and convenient for everyone. Like you said, right now it more acts as kind of a social safety net for folks, which is important. I think that we should continue to provide that, and it should act as that. But without adequate funding, transit, just frankly, in Memphis cannot be the best option when you're comparing it to driving a car. I mean, that's by far the most convenient for folks who can drive and choose to drive. And so it takes a lot more investment to make that a viable option for folks who are willing to leave their car at home and use public transit.
Well, Jackson, I applaud your efforts. Thank you so much for all of your hard work in trying to make Memphis a better place. And anything you'd like to leave our listeners with before we sign off?
Now, I would just encourage everyone to, try out a new mode of transportation, especially now while the weather's nice. Call a friend, go on a walk, go on a bike ride. If you have any questions about kind of the best way to do that, reach out to us at commuteoptionsmemphis.com, and we'd love to talk with you and provide you with more resources. That's
right. Expand your thinking.
Yep.
Get out of your comfort zone, do something different. And it's amazing the good things that you will encounter when you get out of your comfort zone. That's right. All right. Jackson, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody else for listening. And if you enjoyed it, please give us a 5-star rating where you access this podcast, or share us, or email this podcast to someone you think would benefit from it. Jackson's going to go make mobility in Memphis more accessible, and I'm going to go get some justice. Thank you all very much.